So, hello everyone. I'm Rose Cardarelli from the Education for All Coalition, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. And among my esteemed colleagues who have put together this wonderful session, it's Selena DeSolis, Michael Gilad, Tala Swiss, Mike Meraki is not here with us, Siad Sazia Saman, and Curie Chisholm, and Chable Friend. And I really apologize if I messed up on your names. I apologize for that ahead of time. Our session today is going to address the whole child development program and the role of stakeholders, a very important topic, a very difficult topic. And this is sort of a working session, so we kind of need everybody's input. It is being recorded, and this information will be shared so that we can hopefully energize this community. You will have an opportunity to participate in breakout rooms, but because of the size of the audience, we may just keep this in one session. So we are going to talk about the engagement and influences on policy, the clarity of roles among stakeholders, who are the stakeholders and who's missing at the table and needs to be included, and how can we work together as a cohort. So first, we are very honored to open our session with a guest speaker, and this is Hiroshi Okamoto, and I have to tell you something about him. He's a very interesting person. He is a learning measurement coordinator with UNHCR's education team, and he promotes holistic academic and social emotional learning outcomes. Prior to working at UNHCR, Hiroshi was a teacher and a teacher trainer in Japan and the United States. He has served with UNESCO's Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean, the Japanese Embassy in Chile, at Save the Children Mongolia, and 3 UNICEF offices in Mauritania, the Eastern and Southern Africa Regional Office, and the North Pacific Multi-Country Office. Hiroshi has worked with the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, INE, as a lead consultant to develop the Distance Education Psychosocial Support and Social Emotional Learning Resource Guide. And this guide was for teachers and teacher trainers. So he's an experienced lecturer at Tsukaba Graduate University in Japan, and he has over 16 years of national and international education experience and has worked in 40 different countries over 5 continents. So here's the interesting part about Hiroshi. His passion lies in lifelong learning. He's a certified life coach and has traveled to 60 plus countries. He is a former Michelin restaurant chef. That sounds wonderful. And an actor and a dancer. So he's the Renaissance man. He's the total package. He's currently writing a book that brings together the passion to help others. His global experiences and his knowledge of childhood development will be in this book. So we're pleased to have him join us today, and he is going to start us off with an overview of the importance of the whole child development and stakeholder engagement. Hiroshi, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Great, Rose, thank you so much. I wasn't expecting that you will be reading my bio, but
you're a very interesting person.
Great. All right, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So I have just 5 slides that what I just wanted to open this session with. And so let me share the screen. You see my screen, right?
Yes.
All right. All right. So again, my name is Hiroshi Okamoto, and I'm Learning Measurement Coordinator at UNHCR Denmark, Education Headquarters. But as was hinted, I just wanted to put this, lifelong learner piece, because all of you here are, lifelong learner to learn more, and, and we learn, unlearn, and learn more in this, rapidly changing world, which is also very, very relevant to, the topics of today, which is, and I would be not, because I have just less than 10 minutes, so I'm not going to go into the details, and I will just be speaking about the, high level, brief overview of the importance of the whole child development and stakeholder engagement. So let's go. All right, and I hope just a few slides, but with a lot of animations, and I hope you can enjoy some. So overall trend of international education aid, and then none of this presentation is new and whole new and innovative thing, but it's just a reminder and to open up the discussion for stakeholder engagement. So imagine this is the government or all of us. And this is a bit of historical background. You all are familiar with MDG 2, Millennium Development Goals, which primarily focus on access to primary education. And along the time, we have access to other levels and SDG 4 and Global Compact on refugees, which include more focus on inclusion and learning, equity, cross-sectoral, and evidence-based and innovation. And development is not the linear approach, so we shouldn't forget about humanitarian and risk and hazard and emergencies, and which includes the displaced setting, and also that we all are familiar with the COVID-19. So all the more we need to think about the humanitarian development nexus. So that's the whole overview in one slide. And next one is just the needed skill for the whole child development. So if we try to divide countries into three categories: high income, development, and humanitarian, we all know that there was famous buzzword of learning crisis or learning poverty, but which means that children who are in schools, they're not even learning. But if you look at this learning poverty or learning crisis, it all focuses mainly on the foundational skills of literacy and numeracy. And we all know that this COVID-19 that closed schools across the globe kind of expanded this learning crisis that existed prior to COVID. But this is just tip of iceberg in terms of needed skills for children and non-adolescents for the whole childhood development. And let me just focus here on the soft skills and SEL, social and emotional learning, or 21st century skills, or life skills, or transferable skills, or whatever you name. And also we are fully aware of the importance of digital skills and job specific, and also the entrepreneurship skills to go beyond the existing skill training, job training. And the research shows that soft skills or ICL can actually bridge all those different important skill sets. And when we talk about SDG 4 or whole child development, we need to really look at that holistic aspect, not only just foundational skills. And if you look at the evidence of those important skills of SVL, we had a session previously on the assessment of whole child development, but there are emerging assessment and evidence, but we still don't know much about what's going on and how we can promote and how we can measure and etc. So that's kind of overview of needed skills. And this is sort of the last slide and way forward for the whole childhood development. And we're all aware of SEL positive effects. It enhances well-being, academic learning, and it also prepare for the lifelong learners, and it also improves employability, and it also benefits the teachers as well, and then resilience and effective. It is effective and needed in the crisis setting, and it can be a tool or wake-up call to reimagine learning and education. And some of the gaps which we all are familiar with is lack of common definition of SEL or life skill. So different organizations have different definition and naming, although they are mostly talking about the same thing. In the silos among stakeholders, lack of consistent SEL program across all levels of education, from ECE, from early childhood development education to primary, secondary, and even tertiary. So, and a lack of buy-in in the policy and practice, and myths of SEL. And some teachers or educators, I've met so many teachers who said, "Oh, SEL sounds like this is for clinical or mental health specialists. This is not for me as a teacher." And that's also one of the gaps. And challenge to assess holistic learning is also one of the huge gaps, but we are trying to improve And let me quickly share in the UNHCR site, and we have refugee education strategy for 2030, which basically have 3 pillars. One, inclusion in the national education system, which also builds on the global compact on refugees. And number 2 and number 3 are pretty relevant to today's topic. And one is safe enabling learning environment, which includes SEL. And the other one is enabling learners to use education, which includes the usage of skills. And some of the examples include, so like traditional coordination and partnership. UNHCR is also leading the refugee coordination mechanism. And we are also working on the traditional partnerships to promote SEL, such as partnership with Lego Foundation to promote Learn Through Play. But I also wanted to highlight this All Eyes on Learning, which is a Porticus program, and which is a collective interagency approach for holistic learning improvement of displaced learners. And it includes more than 15 different agencies to look at the same goal from different angles, which includes the UNHCR, just to try to also break the silos and also beyond partnership. For example, UNHCR has a partnership with UNICEF, and we have been developing a survey to go with those 11 partnership countries to collect data, in-depth data on education data system and inclusion of refugees into national education system to really find the entry point on the holistic learning. But just to go beyond partnership with UNICEF, we also partner ask and feedback from different organizations like GPE, UNESCO, and Education Cannot Wait, etc. So just to show that we don't have to stick to the traditional official partnership to do our work, and also internal multi-sector work. And within our organizations, we have also health and then mental health, psychosocial support team. And we're trying to find a synergy with education and with those MHPHS colleagues to find, entry point and to have this, stronger impact. So those are some of the examples that I just wanted to share. And it's just some of the necessary actions. It's not including everything we have to do, but just wanted to highlight that we have to really, the 4 key points: advocacy, whole school approach, data assess, and evidence-based intervention. So advocacy, we have to really push SEL into education. And again, this might be the once in a lifetime momentum to transform education system strategically. And we really have to look at the teachers' motivation, well-being, and training before conducting teacher training on SEL, because they also need to promote their own well-being, and they also need to learn why it's important and how they can teach. Because how can be following after they just understand the why and what. So, and we also need to do the whole school and community approach, including parents and community members, and data and assessment. At UNHCR level, we also have a strong challenge on data collection, on education, even access level. So, when we talk about the holistic learning, including academic and also non-academic skills like SEL, it is challenging, but we really have to, we cannot just avoid that part. And we have to, when we look at the displaced learner, we have to consider the data protection issue. So safe data collection is a very important aspect, and holistic assessment. So as I said, previously we had a session on the assessment of the whole child development, and which should look at not only just traditional assessment like summative assessment, but you need to also look at the formative and new ways of assessment, especially for things skill set like SEL that we cannot be tested on the paper only. And lastly but not least, evidence-based intervention. We have to really bridge evidence and implementation part, so practitioner and academia, and it needs to be gathering together just to really promote this whole childhood development. and we need to promote an enabling environment, and it should take into consideration long-term approach, not only just short-term, one-shot activity or program, and more. And to do all those things, we really have to think about the stakeholder engagement, and including traditional stakeholder engagement as well as the innovative ones. So with that, and that's it from my part. And I think this can be a segue to open up the discussion on stakeholder engagement. So thanks for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Hiroshi. Are there any questions from the audience for Hiroshi? I have a question for you. As you look at stakeholder engagement, it appears that you're at a higher level, of course, because you're at the UNHCR level, and the stakeholders that you're working with are sort of lateral to you. How do you engage other stakeholders that maybe may not be at that level to become involved in some of your initiatives and programs?
I think that's the whole point of this discussion. No? Well, so I think, yes, as you rightly said, I'm sitting at the headquarters, which means I'm not being able to see all, the detail in the field. So we see what we can see, but we need to also, first of all, like vertically, we have to look at what's going on at the field level and regional level and HQ level. But of course, vertical angle is not enough. Mm-hmm. So we really have to look at the horizontal and who, as we said in the beginning, who is missing, and so really understand what's going on and assess the situation and what's missing and what should be done and what should be changed, and etc. So we really have to analyze the situation first to be able to say, okay, this is what we need to do in terms of stakeholder engagement, and this is what's missing. So it's a kind of generic answer, but that's all I can say now. Over to you.
And I have to compliment UNHCR because you were brilliant when you conducted the Global Refugee Forum in Geneva in 2019, because you pulled together 3,000 stakeholders from various levels, from government, civil society, NGOs. Everybody came together, and that's when they made commitments, and it was an opportunity to engage. I just have one last question. If there aren't any other questions from the audience, I think, well, there may be one question. Hold on just a second. No, okay. You said that you have had difficulty working with educators on the topic of social emotional learning because they think of that as mental health and something that they don't do. Has there been any move forward to somehow bring educators into that arena so that they understand that it's probably an integral part of everything that they're doing in their classrooms?
Thanks, Rose, for that question. So that kind of statement was based on my general experience, not only for the refugee setting and displaced setting, but when it comes to the teachers, educators in the displaced setting. And I think that can be even more challenging because most teachers, they're also in a very challenging situation in terms of their first of life, and then also on top of that, their previous training that they have or may have not received. So, and they're also facing this large class size, and some countries in Africa, for example, they are having like more than 100 students in your classroom, where when you really didn't even get trained on that, on regular education. So that's when we discuss about social emotional learning, we really have to show why it is important, why it's helping their job, and why it's important for their children, etc. So for that, I think it's not a bilateral conversation with teachers and us. It needs to involve different stakeholders, like policymakers and private sectors and donors, NGOs, etc. So.
Thank you, Hiroshi. I'm now going to turn it over to Selena and to Mikhail to talk about the non-traditional engagements and the influences of policy.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Hiroshi, for your presentation. It was great. Hopefully we can see the presentation later too. I was trying to get screenshots, but I don't know how to do it on my computer, but thank you. I think one of the things that, we talked about as a group when we were thinking about stakeholder engagement, I think a lot came up when and especially when you mention all the things, write your starter list for what needs to be done. Hiroshi, right? Advocacy, thinking about whole school, the data, and then just the evidence-based programming. Clearly that involves all kinds of stakeholders. And a lot of times we have kind of these traditional stakeholders that may be at the table when we're talking about families on the move and persons affected by forced migration. So sometimes you will have like UNICEF or UNHCR, WHO, large international NGOs at the table, perhaps central government like ministries, and who is usually part of this conversation, and then who isn't that we need to bring to the table. And I think contextually this may vary in the different contexts that we work in, but sometimes it seems like less traditional stakeholders that could really enrich the conversation and help us reach either more effective decisions in terms of policy or influence policy, that may be missing from the conversation a lot of times. For example, stakeholders like perhaps local community organizations, representatives of families who are affected by forced migration, for example, or even local government at the more local level to see how we can engage them, not just in talking about these challenges, but also thinking about how we're addressing it. And I think you just mentioned it also, Hiroshi, the private sector, right? When we think about private sector in kind of the macro stakeholder, maybe as funders, investors, but there's also their role in potentially providing employment, for example, for caretakers when families are in new countries, new contexts. So I think there's, we wanted to hear the group's thoughts on what kinds of experiences you've had with stakeholder engagement. Who have you worked with, or who have you felt in your meetings have been missing from the conversation that you think could add more dimension and depth to what we're talking about, and maybe connect also the grassroots community level, the implementation level on the ground with the policy level, because sometimes it seems there may be a gap, and kind of where we're talking about where we want to go and who's feeding, we say alimentando in Spanish, who's contributing to that vision. Are we getting a contribution from all the key stakeholders, and are we thinking about all these different groups? So we were curious when we were talking as a group, who did you think, who do you think as practitioners, as stakeholders, who do you think is missing, or who have you felt is missing from the table, and whether you think that could affect policy could affect policy change either positively or negatively, and what can we do about it? So that's kind of we wanted to hear from the group about that, about stakeholders and who's there, who's not, why, and whether that can improve and make our work further our goals, I think, either in a more inclusive manner. I don't know, Michal, if I left anything out that you'd like to add.
Not at the moment. I would love to hear what our participants have to say about, and to share their experiences.
So the floor is open, or you can put it in the chat. And in the meantime, we can also move on to Tala, and Tala, you can add to this conversation about the clarity among stakeholders.
Thank you, Rose. I would like to follow on Selena's questions, and we are all in agreement that stakeholders' engagement is critical to any process and at all levels. When you start developing an idea to when you start implementing it to the evaluation process, we are all in agreement that stakeholders play a critical role at all levels. And in humanitarian context, we also are in agreement that we are all compelled, or we feel the urge that we want to contribute because we're driven by the humanitarian cause. We have this urge or feeling compelling us to contribute to this thing. But when we come to think about who decides what each stakeholder, what role each stakeholder plays, And in many cases, adding to Hiroshi's presentation, sometimes, particularly in our context where we have a lot of refugees and we have a lot of emergency context, we always feel that the solutions are being sorted out, and in a way they are kind of imposed on our regions. So in a way, the point is, sometimes when you are thinking of the solution, you always think, and whenever you consider the stakeholders, you always think that you are in the center. So our question is, or the question that we wanted to ask the group, if you are not in the center, will that affect your understanding or the clarity of the role that you want to play? So that's the first question. The other question which we wanted to ask, which is, when you think of the stakeholders' roles, is it always you think of what you will win of that relationship, or is it what you will give in that relationship, or your contribution? Is it what you will give or what you will take out of it? And the third question, which we wanted to share with the group, are the roles static or dynamic? Do they change? And if they change, will that affect the power dynamics among the stakeholders? So these are actually the three questions that we wanted to share with the group and hear feedback from them. Thank you.
Sazia, do you want to add to that in our sort of presentation of questions so we can have a group discussion afterwards?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rose. As we are hearing from, Natala as well, regarding the stakeholder, involvement. Basically, any program, stakeholder engagement is so important, not only any humanitarian context or any crisis context, but that is for whole child development, for the learner, for the children. That is so important. Who are the people actually, engaged? I mean, who has some association with that learner? So that is, when we are designing the program, I mean, from the design part, planning part to implementation and the practice and the, evidence creation, all throughout the, different phases, the stakeholder is so important. So that's we need to know who are these stakeholders, but that also depend on the geographical location, country context, and also the context. It is the mainstream children or some special, location or geographical issues. That is also important. And basically for the learner, like most of the cases we have seen that basically who will be maybe implementing. So we have seen that people are, engaged over there. And many cases like the non-government organization or the government organization, or if it is humanitarian context or the emergency context, so some international organization, they are also involved. These are the very common scenario. But many times we have seen, like the family, community people, sometimes we have seen they are missing. As parents, and they are the first teacher, and they have so many knowledge and the reality they know, and also the teacher who are carrying the program for the children. So all of us, I think we want to see the children, that they would be curious and their development, not only academic part, that would be very aligned with all the development areas. I mean, they will be, competent in not only the intellectually, physically, socio-emotionally, every aspect. So to reach those or to achieve those skills, actually, who are the people? For example, when children are coming in settings, for what are the design of the setting? So not only pedagogy curriculum issue, but also the designer of the location as well. So these people, I think those are so important. But as per our discussion, actually, we are interested to hear from the participant from here. So maybe they will be writing the chat box who are the stakeholder in this we need to engage, or who are the missing. And my last question was to know from them that who can be included in this process throughout these different phases. So maybe we can hear from them, or if they have any question, we can come back again. So over to you, Rose, if you want to add something.
Well, why don't we have Curry round this off, and then we'll be able to have a very, very dynamic discussion. Curry, would you like to add your thoughts about the working together as a cohort?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rose, and everyone, because what I'm going to say is about to kind of round it off. My discussion is going to be very much about the roles and responsibilities. It is very much related to that, because once we know what are the roles and responsibilities of a stakeholder, of a different stakeholders, then it is easier for us to actually determine how we can work together. Because whenever we're thinking of stakeholders, we're thinking of the community, the people, the parents, the children, the leaders of the community, the implementers, whoever are working with the community, the agencies, different agencies, government bodies. Often we see that these different bodies do not actually work in synergy, because government body would like to exclude different parties, or different parties would like to exclude the other ones. But as long as we do not include everyone, the ultimate development or sustainability is not there, or we cannot ensure stakeholders' engagement. So we wanted to hear from the audience here their own experiences of how we can work as a cohort, how we can include everyone into one. And not only that, what are the elements, so that what are the elements are there that we need to mitigate and create a strategy so we can all work together as a cohort. So thank you.
I would ask the audience if you're comfortable to come on camera so we can have an open discussion. And I think we can start with Karina's comment, which is a very valid comment. She says, I love how students themselves are increasingly put at the center of decision-making. I really enjoyed a lot of the sessions at WISE last year that really made that clear. Similarly, I love how many students are claiming a seat at the table if that is not happening for them. So that was a very important part of many of our discussions in preparation for this particular session. And that is, you have to bring the child to the table. The child has to have a voice and be able to contribute to that. So let's open it up to the audience for your thoughts. How can we make this better? How can we include everybody? And how can we do the best to ensure that stakeholders are working together for a concerted effort? Feel free to come off mute. And has anyone had experiences where you've felt like maybe you've made decisions without the stakeholders' engagement, without them being involved in your decisions? I think I've seen that a lot, where at a higher level, at governmental levels and such, we make decisions for those that are the recipients, thinking we know better. And it may be influenced by culture, by country, by various different components on that affect these individuals. And we try to make decisions for them, and that may not be the right decision.
If I can just jump in here real quick. Something that I found really interesting in my past experience, obviously very limited past experience due to young age, but was that a lot of the work that has been done was very dominated by the interest or field of interest and from donors. So I think obviously donors and funders are a very influential stakeholder. And I was just wondering if people who are working more in the field are feeling like that is changing at the moment, or how much of an influence, again, donors and funders are still playing. And if you think that that is something, if they're having more and more an understanding of what is actually needed on the ground. I don't know if anyone can speak to that.
Corinna, I can say, we're an implementing organization, and we're trying to, even as a local organization working in this region, we are trying to work more in terms of engaging young people and students in the content that we're including in our SEL programming. I think there's a lot of conversation about being more student-centered, more youth-centered in general. And I think amongst donors, I just went to a philanthropy conference and I heard, really a lot of messages about more inclusive strategies, but I don't know how much we're getting to actually making that happen, right? I think we're convinced, but I think making that actually happen and really ensuring that those most impacted by some of these challenges are able to influence policy is there's a gap. I get the impression, at least in the context that I'm working with, that there's a huge gap still. And it sounds good and we all talk about it, but really then there's the stakeholder table, then there's the coordination table, and it's not easy to get someone at the table, more so even a young person. They'll be like the youth table, but the youth table is separate, right? There's like a parallel convening for youth-led organizations, and then there's the decision makers and the funders. So it's almost like a conversation between kind of these international agencies and funders, and there's another conversation that they'll often fund amongst young people, but somehow between those there isn't really a dynamic conversation about where we should be prioritizing based on not just this whole needs thing. It's more like the interests and priorities of young people, because young people are closer to children and can also help speak for their younger siblings or family members. So that's my perception. I'm not sure what other people's experiences are in other contexts.
I also can add something, which is the other image, which is sometimes we bring young people or children to sit on the table with the adults. And so this kind or form of participation, I always feel as if like we are stealing these young children we are stealing their voices because they end up mimicking the adults or repeating what the adults want to hear. So in a way, like even that form of participation or sort of consultation doesn't really reflect what the children or the youth want. So I always think, in my opinion, we have tried it in some of our programs, which is, as Selena said, we have the two tables, but our role is always formalizing the forms of communication between the young people and the decision makers, because sometimes they speak different languages. So in a way, sometimes we need to play the role of the interpreter just to make sure that their voices are heard. And at the same time, in a way, the vocab that the decision makers or the other stakeholders is understood by the younger generation. In addition, I also feel that the social media and the internet has also contributed a lot in in bridging also that gap. And exposing young children to make their voice even heard louder.
Yeah, Tella, I really liked what you said about this importance of playing this kind of translator or intermediary. And I think it's not only between, young people and like other kind of it's also between stakeholders. I mean, like academia speak very differently than policymakers, so there's an important role for those people that can speak different languages and can help people understand. But I think also what is really important is that you help different stakeholders realize that their position within this wider ecosystem, and value their contribution, but also that of others. Because I think often when you bring stakeholders together, they might not always really fully realize the potential and the contribution of these other stakeholders. So there's a really important need for us to help people understand that other stakeholders do have a huge added value. And I think there's much more concerted effort required around that as well.
So it sounds like we have to spend some time sort of socializing the different disciplines and the different agencies and organizations up front, so you can have an appreciation for another person's point of perspective and view. That's very good. That's very good. That's something that I was not aware of.
Liz, can I add a little bit? Yeah, thank you. Just I want to add another angle, like we know that there's some, interest and some direction from the donor side or the, decision makers. Sometimes it happens for every program. But the context, the implementer, what are the, context over there that is so important, the culture, language, all the, related issues. So that is for that, the people who are, those stakeholders who are engaged for that, actually that communication, that discussion need to be done in a one tableau. That is missing part most of the cases, because not all over the world, humanitarian context, emergency context, not the equal. And there is some political environment, the country, some values, so many issues are connected over here. So sometimes bottom-up approach, I mean, it is very important really to hear from the community people, from the people who, who are totally, engaged over there, who are receiving the program. So we need to hear from them, and then, make the decision maker need to make them understand that this is the context. We understand that global view, then the local context. These two alignment, these two is so important. And most of the cases, successful program, and if you want to see a whole child, developed a whole child, that would be so important. Thank you. Over to you.
So one area that I find difficult when I do my work, because I provide alternate education to children in refugee camps, is the stakeholder involvement of families, of parents, because it could be generational, it could be cultural, it could be language. There's lots of issues that tend to impede upon them being a part of the process. Does anyone have any ideas or suggestions in that regard, on how we bring in families, the immediate sort of focal point of maybe the child, how we can include them and how we can hear their voices as well? Selena?
I mean, I don't think there's easy solutions to any of this, obviously, but I feel like sometimes, especially when there are families on the move and affected by, forced migration and conflict, I think that, and I think we talked about another session in Salzburg, but it's like you forget that so many of these people already have, whatever professions and a whole life trajectory of experience. And I think a lot of times, for example, there are healthcare workers, teachers, community leaders. So I think it's really being really purposeful and making sure to really ask just more questions. I think it's asking more questions and being more consistent about asking questions and engaging people, because I think you have to, and going back to the cultural piece, right? Like really understand where people are coming from and understand the context. So how are you going to work on, just the whole child and learning if we don't really understand where people are coming from at that moment? And it's so important, right? We all know this. That's why we're here. It's so important to just have some sort of normalcy and to have kids have access to education. But what does that mean? And how are we leaving out the educators from these communities when they're right there? So I think just asking questions, asking more questions, and having more fluid interactions and constant interactions to be able to, in equal footing, not so much like beneficiary donor, but really as peers and trying to address a challenge that we're all facing together.
Curry?
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, I can speak that I feel that research can play a significant role here, because when you're researching constantly that what works, what doesn't work, that actually helps. And then having that flexibility while you're designing a program, that whatever is working, we need to include it, and whatever is not working, we need to think or rethink and redesign if necessary. So that sort of flexibility actually helps. And often children might not be able to speak for themselves, but in my experience, what I've seen that if we actually observe their activities or how much they're participating into something that we have designed into it, whether the parents are buying it in or not, those matter a lot. And also that kind of indicates that the intervention might be successful eventually, because ultimately if we want the success of the children, then of course we need to make sure that they're actually enjoying what they're doing, and then that speaks what they want to say. So that's my opinion on this.
So, Curry, what you're talking about sort of dovetails into the last session, which had to do with measurement and evaluation. So, we should take a research approach to the stakeholder engagement portion of it as well. It sounds like we need to do our research. We need to bring in the right stakeholders. We need to educate and socialize them to who we are and what our goal and intent is. And then we need to work together to ensure that we are including everyone at the table so that they have the ability to make decisions. And then ultimately that affects policies and procedures and how we conduct our business with them. And so I think, and what we heard early on sort of resonates with me, is that we always worry about the funders, because in order to do the work that we do, we need the donations and the funding. So we have to have good relationships with them. And sometimes their purpose is very intentional. So how do we sort of mitigate that so that we satisfy what their goals and objectives are, while also eventually bringing that to the child perspective? And then there are other factors that are involved, whether it be social media, whether it be digital technology. All those seem to be factors that influence how we involve stakeholders and how we stay engaged and how we ultimately reach the same calls to action that we all want. Mikal?
I can chime in from the research and academic contribution. I think often academics are put into the mold of kind of like assessment and evaluation, and then brought to the table much too late often, especially with refugee situations that are often, as we can see now, very sudden. So there is no time for like advanced kind of like long-term planning, and we really have to be transferable and kind of learn from experiences of the past and be able to implement very quickly. And I think academics can contribute so much more, not only with kind of assessing what kind of programs work and which do not, but also understanding the implication and the incentives of different stakeholders, and helping to incentivize engagement. Because, for example, we can evaluate the outcomes of programs such as whole child education and development, how they will promote the long-term outcomes of children in terms of all life factors, health, education, employment, and that implicate the society as a whole, because it will determine the productivity of individual going forward. At the same time, we can also evaluate what happens if we don't do that. What happens if we neglect the problem and do not address it? And what would be the cost of that? Because often the cost of not doing something effective to address the problem and to address the needs of children can be very costly in the long term. And we have really strong research to indicate that at the moment. And I think that can really be helpful in kind of showing in a very concrete way to different stakeholders, including private sector, why can it be very beneficial and serve their interest to invest in this sort of solution and prioritize them higher in their kind of agenda.
Hiroshi?
Sure. Just wanted to jump in and just to share some reflection. I think mainly my point. There are 3 points. One is you mentioned about roles about the traditional donor and fundees approach. I think we really need to have more flexibility, and we really, for example, as a practitioner, there's no space for mistakes, and we really have to deliver the result. And when we talk about whole child development, which doesn't have right 100% black white and black answers, we really have to really have a mindset of trial and error, and come up with innovation, and also celebrate the mistake or learning. and really document that. Because we always talk about, good practice and best practice, but we don't talk about why, this and that kind of practice or intervention was failing. And so just to acknowledge that flexibility and the mistake or slash learning is really crucial. And the second point is, common language, because we talk about, parents, children, etc. Yes, I think research can relatively have, better space to have mistake or experimental approach, but I'm sitting in the evidence team, but I cannot talk negative thing about research. But usually, or most cases, the language that research result and paper, deliver is not understandable. And when we talk about teachers, parents, and children, they don't understand. I mean, even practitioners have difficulty in understanding, right? So really, we have to, really translate in a really simple term, so that parents understand in their language, teachers, they have their own language. No, I think most of the language that we're having right now will not be understood to parents. So really try to understand, and it also visual helps, right? So creative mindset is really crucial. And the third point is related to that. We really have to bring creative mindset, and also people who are kind of influencer. Like kids admire their favorite singers or actors, including in displaced settings. So, why don't we try to bring those really influencers? But to do that, we have to deliver the same common language to them, so they will understand the importance of this whole child development, and maybe creating the bestseller movie, I don't know, Netflix movie, to talk about in SEL and the importance of the whole child development, because we don't have that kind of thing that we can naturally enjoy and learn about that. So it's all about kind of serious setting. So just wanted to share that reflection, because I cannot talk about the challenge of bureaucracy because it's recorded, right? So I'll just stop with those points. Over to you, Rose, and others.
So what I'm hearing is that practitioners need to have researchers and education as part of their fundamental foundation in everything that they do, and that we all need to speak a common language when we do come together, and that the cost of non-engagement can be more devastating than what we anticipate. But we have to deliver the results. And this whole concept about celebrating, my background is with government. And what we would do is when we would conduct an event, an exercise, or whatever you want to call it, we would have lessons learned. And those lessons learned can be potentially negative, because what you're doing is you're finding the areas that you want to improve upon the next time around. But then, as has been mentioned in the chat, the problem with that is then we expose ourselves to funders and grantors of our deficiencies and where we want to improve. And this is so real time, and crisis and emergencies are so real time that there isn't the opportunity to take a step back or to reflect or to do better. So those are all issues. Now, someone had a hand up and I missed that. So who wanted to make the final comment?
It was me, actually. I raised my hand and I thought of writing it in the chat box.
Oh.
I think, Rose, just adding to this is, what are the guiding principles that is driving us to have such conversations and open up? I want to go back to your question of of our experience of how we involved parents, which is, first of all, we needed to build trust with them, and it wasn't easy. Trust is key in any process, and unless they feel that they are safe and they can build trust and we can communicate with them, even their participation and their form of engagement becomes fake. And I think it applies to all stakeholders. If they feel that they are not safe and they are not heard and they are not respected and they don't have trust relationship, that what they share is going to lead to something substantial, they will end up just jargoning, just saying big words and later on, when you need them to work or start implementing their promises or anything, you will not find them. So I think how we can formulate this between donors and organizations and the different stakeholders with children, parents, teachers, educators, name them. It is something that we all, and also people working in the academia. So probably how we can forge these forms of trust is also key in having meaningful stakeholder engagement.
Well, on that note, that is a word that I've not heard much in many of my other involvements and engagements, but trust, fundamental word of trust among every individual that is a stakeholder or that's involved. So thank you very much, Tala, for that comment. Karina, I'm going to turn it over to you for our last 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, Rose, and thank you everyone for this really amazing session. I kept looking down because I was taking so many notes because it wasn't that I wasn't engaging, it was that I was so engaged that I wanted to just keep track of everything that we were talking about. So yeah, we're almost at time. I'm gonna share the link to a really quick feedback survey in the chat right now, and I would love if all of you could just take 2 minutes to complete the survey and let us know what you thought of today's session. That would really help us. And then I want to thank Rose and all the members of the Whole Child Development for Displaced Learners Network for organizing this great session. I would like to thank Portuguese for supporting us as a partner. We're really grateful for their contribution because they're really making this happen. And of course, I would like to thank Hiroshi for joining us today, for giving this really interesting and fun presentation. I hope you can share that with me afterwards so that maybe I can make that available to everyone who was not able to join us live today. So once we upload the playlist on YouTube, I would love to link that if that's okay with you, obviously. If not, that's also fine. And we have a couple of other sessions coming up later this afternoon. So it would be great if some of you joined those as well. You can find those on our website, and I can post the link to that in the chat as well. That's this one. And that was my final note. Thank you everyone so much. I hope to see you in one of the following sessions. And I wish all of you a wonderful rest of your day, evening, afternoon, morning, whatever. Thank you so much.